My name is Doug Laney, and I'll be your host for this episode. By way of introduction, I'm an executive advisor, author, and instructor specializing in data analytics and AI strategy. So the question we're going to ask is your AI investment quietly creating a financial burden? We're going to be uncovering the hidden costs of AI-related technical debt and reveal practical strategies to avoid it, ensuring your AI initiatives deliver real ROI. Today, I'm speaking with Frank Lavigne, Advisory Board Member of CloudArmy, and Paul Brownell, CTO of Growth Acceleration Partners, about the recurring challenges and creative solutions surrounding AI technical debt, data readiness for AI initiatives, the intricacies of data engineering, selecting the right tools for AI development, and navigating the exciting shift from predictive AI to generative AI. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Great. All right, let's dive right in. So I want to ask, what are the most common impediments to successful real-world AI projects from your perspective? And what strategies do you find most effective for identifying and mitigating these, more earlier in the development life cycle than a lot of organizations do?
Yeah, I would say that people underestimate the importance of how they take care of their data estate. Really, I saw a meme this morning, actually, which is very timely, where it showed I think it was an F-35 jet, like flying through the sky. And it said, your data, your AI aspirations. And then it showed a pockmarked, potholed road down a desert, down in the desert, and it says your data infrastructure. And I think that pretty much says it all.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. From a technical perspective, that's the biggest unseen cost. The other big leak in the bucket is, with all the hype around AI, there's a lot of initiatives that aren't founded in a business value proposition. So people are sort of wandering in without an intentional path of, how am I going to get return on this investment? At least what's my theory for how this is going to return on investment? So I think those two are the big ones. Mm-hmm.
Little follow-up question then. How do you balance innovation with, well-defined business initiatives?
I think it starts with at least having a theory. Use the scientific method, come up with a hypothesis around where the business value is going to be and potentially where it can be gained using technology, and then apply some prototyping, like do real live experiments to prove out your theory. I think most often, like any other exploration, you'll find that it's maybe 10 degrees off the direction that you originally set out. But if you begin the experimentation and work incrementally, you'll find gold in there eventually.
I think that's great advice. Starting with a hypothesis is something a lot of organizations don't do, and following that scientific method is something that I noticed over the years. Even data scientists couldn't even articulate the scientific method, yet they call themselves scientists.
No, exactly. I think the iterative approach is the winning approach, right? Because, I think one mistake I've seen happen is they have these grand, large initiatives, and the larger the ship, the harder it is to turn, right? So if you have these smaller kind of proofs of concept, you can kind of find out in smaller increments, how far were we off course? Like, did this really work the way we expected it to, right? And the risks are lower, and, I know the rewards are technically lower, but you can iterate these a lot faster. You can get your answers in weeks rather than quarters or, years, I suppose. So you also have less on the line too, and you can actually be more experimental, right, with the smaller projects. And when it fails, because if you're not failing at a certain rate, again, the scientific method, like you pointed out, if you're not failing at a certain rate, maybe you're not pushing the boundary enough, right? If even pushing the boundary is what you're going for, and I would say at this point, if you're expecting a large ROI on generative AI, that is high risk. That is a high risk proposition right now. And, you really do have to accept that you're going to have a certain failure rate. But theoretically, that one project that does kick in and does find that hidden gem somewhere, well, that should pay for the other ones.
So it sounds like having some hypotheses and then perhaps a portfolio of things you're working on, some of which will actually pop is the right way to go. Mm-hmm. One of the big challenges organizations have is on data readiness. So, before diving into an AI initiative, how would you typically assess an organization's data readiness, and what are their fundamental data engineering practices that you emphasize to ensure a more kind of scalable and reliable data pipelines?
Well, first I would find out how many data engineers they have, right? I've been advisory into a number of situations. Oh, we have this many data scientists. Well, how many data engineers do you have? And if they take a while to get an answer, or the answer is really low, I think there's a certain ideal ratio between how many data scientists you have and how many data engineers you have. And I think a lot of people underestimate the importance of data engineering. I see them as, it's a bit like the old rock stars and roadies thing, right? Like, in order to, you have a rock star, everyone pays to see the band or the artist, right? But you don't see the army of roadies that set up the lights, set up, the sound system and things like that. And I think that you have to think of it from that point of view, as opposed to, AI this, AI that.
Yeah, from our perspective at GAP, we have a 10-point data readiness criteria list that we use, and I'm lining up directly with Frank on the data engineering part is the most often overlooked area because it's not very glorious. It's a lot of mundane, routine, detail, hard pick and shovel work. But I think the main components there, the biggest ones, are around data quality. So, do you have accurate data that you're confident in? Is it complete? Does it come in the timeframes that you're looking for? Data governance, sort of how do you control the security of that data, access to it, that kind of thing. And then traceability, because ultimately, once you're making decisions based on that information, inevitably somebody's going to say, "Hey, how did you get that piece of data? Where did that come from?" So being able to trace it back and understand the origins of the data is ultimately will become important once you get a working system in place.
Yeah, and much more so with AI lately, when trust is a big issue and people are concerned about hallucination. But there's the flip side of the AI coin, which is, perhaps AI is helping to enable the acceleration of developing and managing data pipelines. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, but again, you get into the risk portfolio, the risk aspect of this is, how is that data trained, and is there a hidden gotchas there, right? Is this going to inject critical vulnerabilities or whatnot? I still think that AI is a great assistant. It's a great helper. I use it when I'm writing code, and it helps me be more efficient. But I also, in the back of my mind, like, do I trust it?
Right. Right.
I would just like to add, I think we see big benefit of using generative AI on the side of the pipeline, not in the center of the pipeline. For example, analyzing data sources to determine the data types and data models. Previously that required a data engineer to go in and look at the details of the data and type everything. Now you can use an LLM to almost automatically recognize the format, the schema of the data that you've got coming in. It at least makes a really good first guess. And then, you sort of, using the digging analogy again, you can hand dig the last few feet around the big wires, and, use a human data engineer to do that detailed work to get it all where you need it. But you can get 90% automatically now.
Makes sense. All right. Well, let's talk about AI tools themselves. There's obviously a massive proliferation of AI tools and types of AI tools and AI platforms. So how, let's say I'm selecting a tool, how would you approach selecting the right tool for a particular job, especially when a lot of organizations are trying to balance or determine whether they want to use open source solutions or more proprietary offerings?
Yeah, certainly, understanding how the data is used and how to protect your data in the way that you need it is forefront in the tool analysis and tool selection. I think going in, you have to acknowledge that whatever choice you make is only the best choice for about 5 minutes. Because right now, the evolution of all these tools is so fast. So the main point there is don't spend a lot of time trying to get the perfect decision, because it'll only be perfect for a moment. Just choose the things that look like they're good enough and get going. And again, that incremental approach of quickly pick a tool, prototype based on it. If it looks like it's giving you the benefits you have, keep going. If it isn't, be prepared to throw it overboard and grab another one and try a different path.
Yeah, I agree. I think it mirrors that other thing we talked about earlier in the conversation, where smaller, kind of more flexible choices, because this is a field that's changing very fast. I mean, I think 5 minutes is actually quite generous, in the way things are moving. And obviously, I'm a big fan of open source, particularly when it comes to AI, just because whether it's a small startup, whether it's a large company, they may decide to change direction. Change direction as in, cut off the product, change direction in terms of sunsetting a model that you're using, right? And then in that case, when you're talking about governance, oh, well, if, I won't name any names, but, if this large, well-known AI serving and research organization decides to shut down model XYZ version 1, and you have to upgrade to, next version, you are kind of stuck, right? You may have budgeted for that. You may not have, probably didn't. So now you have to go back and check everything that has a touch to that model. And that's really one of my big concerns, is like, what's the long-term consequences of the creep of this? Like, who's doing the governance on this, right? Like, who's tracking, is there a spreadsheet somewhere of, this solution uses this model from this vendor? And then I'm not even going to open up a big can of worms of GDPR and compliance and all that sort of thing, which I think probably warrants a show of its own. But yeah, no, I think you're right. You have to be flexible, but you also have to, keep notes, right? I remember watching Mythbusters, and one of the hosts said something like, it's playing around and doing fun stuff, but when you take notes, it becomes science, right? Like that was the, that's my motto.
Yeah, very good. All right. Well, along the same lines, let's talk about generative AI versus predictive AI. As the industry is evolving, talk about the key considerations and challenges involved in transitioning from more predictive AI models, the traditional AI models, to integrating and leveraging generative AI solutions, and doing so within an enterprise context.
Right. I think there's a lot of gotchas with generative AI, right? So predictive AI has been going on for decades, right? Whether in the 90s they were called OLAP cubes, then it became big data and machine learning or statistics. Generative AI is, a relatively new concept for sure. But I think what's also interesting about generative AI, at least from an infrastructure point of view, which again, I think people tend not to estimate this, right? It's very asymmetric in predictive AI, right? You take a lot of compute, a lot of data, and then you have a model that, you can actually use it with modest compute. Whereas generative AI, you need high levels of compute on both ends, right? So in that sense, it's very symmetric. In that sense, it's very expensive too, right? So each token has a certain cost to it. So that is something I think is an unintended consequence of the cost of running these projects, right? So what does that look like? What does the risks of that look like? Plus, there's a number of concerns about certain models not, using copyrighted data to be trained on. And I'm not a lawyer, but I do know that these things are working their way through the courts. So again, I think it boils down to risk, right? Like, what's the risk of I use model XYZ from this company, which may or may not have taken it from top publications? I myself have seen models, I've seen my writing and my articles from MSDN and in the past be used to train this, because I could tell, like, hey, wait a minute, that sounds like me. And when I did actually talk to a lawyer about this, and when the lawyer was done laughing, which is never a good sign when the lawyer laughs at a question, she basically said, well, it's you're not a particularly large publishing company, you're just an individual author. Plus you also signed it was a work for hire, so technically it was the who MSDN that owned the copyright on that, so like you really don't have anything to do. But I can totally understand where there are much more famous authors than I facing the same issue, and I can totally understand with that.
Yeah. So we're still in a world where purpose-built AI models are both cheaper and often more effective than LLMs. I mean, we just saw where an Atari system from, I don't know, what, the 1980s just beat, an LLM in chess, just, mop the floor with it. So yeah, don't be so quick to adopt an LLM, right? For everything.
I mean, also too, like, don't use a screwdriver to hammer in a nail either, right? Like, I'm pretty sure Deep Blue, which is a system from the 90s, I believe, would wipe the floor with the Atari, right? So, in fairness, but I also wouldn't ask the Atari to compose a Shakespearean sonnet about, my dog, right? It's using the right tool for the right problem.
What are your thoughts, Paul?
The beauty of the generative AI is it's now top of everyone's consciousness right now. Everybody's thinking about AI and how can we revolutionize the way we do work and the way we do business. The downside is that people assume it's the solution for everything. So to Frank's point, they're running around with a hammer. Everything looks like a nail, and that's where purpose built AI models can be beneficial. For example, we were talking with a client the other day who really wanted to build a model for predictive analysis on their vehicle fleet to look at maintenance records and predict failure rates and try to do preventative maintenance using AI. And they were thinking, generative AI was the solution for this. But this is a classic example where a, a predictive model using machine learning techniques is perfectly suited and even better at those kind of predictions than a general purpose generative AI model. So it's about having the ability to choose the right tool for the job, and that's where the data scientists come in to be able to say, okay, based on this theory of business benefit and the data that you have, you should use this type of model. And just picking the right general approach is going to be the very first thing to save you headache in the future.
Yeah, all great advice. So let's look ahead at the future of AI development. How do you each foresee the evolving landscape of AI, of the the development of AI impacting the skill sets and the best practices within data engineering and software development? And I guess we're all kind of thinking, what changes should our teams be prepared for?
I think that the best way to prepare for that future, and again, this is a very difficult field to predict the future on, right? I remember before ChatGPT came out, there was this AI winter. We're headed for another AI winter, right? Clearly that hasn't happened. I do think that there's a lot of over speculation and over promising that's going on. Like, I do feel for a lot of junior developers who feel very much left out of a career, of a promising career. I don't think that's going to hold. I really don't. I think vibe coding has its place, but I also think the unintended consequences of putting vibe coded solutions into production at enterprise scale is a very bad idea. I think that is just that's a couple of bridges too far for me. I would say we need to really understand the asset and the value that we have in our data or our data estates at every organization and start treating data engineers like the rock stars, right? Or put them up on stage with the rock stars, because they are the ones that are going to, the ability and capacity of your data engineering team is going to determine how successful you'll be in AI long term.
Yeah, I would say on top of that to be a learning organization, because as you said, there's no way to predict the future. All we know is that innovation is happening at an unprecedented rate, and staying on top of that, constantly learning, constantly experimenting with new technology, and encouraging people to learn and grow is going to be the key. I'm a firm believer that automation alone or human engineering alone is going to be beat by the combination of those two. So I'm a big fan of the cyborg programmer is going to win in this one. So the people that can leverage these technologies can can ride on top of them and leverage them to their maximum capability. Those are going to be the winners in the market and help companies be the most innovative and leading in the industry.
So the ideal approach for the foreseeable future is still a hybrid approach.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. All right. Well, as we wrap up here, if you had to summarize kind of one key takeaway in a minute or so for information security officers, CEOs, other IT decision makers, what would it be and why?
I would say it's one thing to implement AI, and it's another thing to own AI, right? It's one thing to put a model into production, but now that becomes an artifact that you have to care and maintain for. And you really ought to think about what that looks like in the future, right? Whether that's the model getting sunsetted or the model has some kind of legal issue and you may be liable, right? Like, so just think about the entire ownership cycle, right? We all hear stories about people who go out and they buy a boat, right? And very quickly they learn about the cost of owning that boat. And this happened to a friend of mine where he bought a boat, and he said the cliche is that their two happiest days of a boat owner's life is the day they buy it and then the day they sell it. And I've never been in that position because my wife said no, absolutely, from the get-go. But I can totally understand, having seen that through other people I know, and that has kept me boat free. That and several other things have kept me boat free. So I think if you look at it that way, yeah, it's great to have, but you also keep in mind that there's a TCO to this that no one's really figured out exactly what that's going to look at. I think we could take some good ballpark figures on that, but yeah, and also the cautionary tale of the $1 SUV, right? If you haven't heard that story, look it up.
Good story.
Yeah, as we sort of opened, I think one of the keys is to be experimental, have a theory, build some prototypes, but more importantly, create a learning organization. One of the most powerful things we've done in the last couple of years around AI is to create communities where people are sharing information internally about the experiments that they're running, and each person is building on the ideas of the last to come up with some really innovative uses. It's a really fascinating time in technology. This is an inflection point that will make dramatic changes for us. And I think it's about, being a learning organization and supporting that opportunity to experiment in a controlled environment.
Wonderful. Great parting thoughts. All right. So Paul, Frank, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate you coming on the program. Thanks to everyone for listening. Hopefully you got a lot out of this from the podcast today. For further information on what we talked about, definitely head over to growthaccelerationpartners.com. And next week, we'll be back with another episode in the podcast series. Until then, make sure you subscribe to this podcast on all major platforms and follow the ongoing conversation on our socials at EM360Tech on X and LinkedIn. And for more great daily content, you can always head over to em360tech.com.